June 4, 1942. The Pacific dawn hung heavy over Midway Atoll, mist curling above restless waves. Smoke rose from the USS Yorktown like a wounded giant gasping for air. Decks were scarred, metal twisted, fire flickering across shattered planes. Sailors crawled through debris, their faces streaked with soot, eyes wide with disbelief. You could almost feel the heat, taste the salt and smoke mingling in the air. "Patch her! Keep her alive!" barked Lieutenant Commander James Clark, voice cutting through the chaos. Around him, men moved like ghosts, hauling hoses, hammering metal, shoving pumps into flooded compartments. Every second mattered. Every action could mean survival, or sinking. The carrier, once a proud symbol of American power, now teetered on the edge of disaster. And here's where you pause, right here. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe, because this story is about courage, ingenuity, and a ship that defied all odds. Below deck, wounded sailors groaned, treated by corpsmen working with hands slick with blood and seawater. Sparks danced over steel as welders fought to mend ruptures in the hull. Chief Petty Officer Robert Hughes shouted instructions over the roar of engines and pumps, sweat streaming down his face. "She's not going down. Not today," he muttered. Every heartbeat on that ship felt like a defiance against fate itself. Thousands of miles away, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto studied intelligence reports in Tokyo. His analysts were confident. Yorktown was finished. Months of repairs would be needed, they said. Yet an uneasy feeling crept over him. Could the Americans really defy such destruction? Could this ship sail again, turning the tide in the Pacific? At Pearl Harbor, repair crews readied themselves. Foreman outlined a near-impossible plan. Patch a carrier in 72 hours. Engineers, welders, and shipwrights exchanged grim looks but nodded. "We do it, or we fail," one said. The clock began to tick. As night settled, Yorktown floated like a scarred sentinel, half dead but not gone. Sparks, shouts, and the hiss of pumps filled her decks. Men worked tirelessly, guided by sheer will, precision, and desperation. Every bolt, every weld, every pump restarted was another heartbeat for a ship refusing to die. Then came the whisper across intelligence channels. June 5, 1942. Dawn had barely broken over Pearl Harbor, but the shipyard buzzed like a hornet's nest. You could feel the urgency in every step, hear it in the clanging of hammers, the roar of generators, the hiss of welding torches. Yorktown sat battered at the dock, her flight deck scarred with bomb craters, engine silent, her hull groaning under the weight of damage. Every sailor and shipwright knew the clock was merciless. 72 hours, that was all. Chief Petty Officer Hughes moved through the decks, checking crews, encouraging men who were soaked with sweat and grime. "Faster! Every minute counts!" The words echoed in the cavernous hangar bays. Engineers raced across scaffolding, dragging steel plates and welding equipment, while welders fought sparks that could ignite what little fuel remained. It felt impossible. And yet, there was no other choice. The Pacific War would not wait. Below, crews pumped water out of flooded compartments. Electrical lines were patched mid-current. Damaged guns were stripped and rebuilt. Every step felt like a gamble. "We either save her, or she sinks, and half the fleet loses a heartbeat," one sailor whispered, voice barely audible over the chaos. You could almost smell the sweat and oil and hope mixed together like gasoline on a flame. In Tokyo, Yamamoto's aides scoured intercepted radio chatter. They expected confirmation of the carrier's permanent loss. But subtle hints, small signals of movement, crew chatter, partial transmissions, began to unsettle them. A sinking ship shouldn't be sending signals. Something was wrong. Or right, from the Americans' perspective. The sun climbed higher, and the pace grew frantic. Cranes swung steel like giant arms, welders danced over jagged metal, and sailors carried fuel lines as if their own lives depended on it. Because they did. Planes were moved off the deck in record time, bombs and ordnance carefully stored. Flight crews watched anxiously, knowing that if Yorktown left Pearl Harbor in operational condition, it would strike back at the Japanese fleet at Midway. Amidst this chaos, a young engineer named Tom Reynolds paused for a breath. He looked at the gaping holes in the deck and whispered, "We're crazy. This can't be done." Around him, the men laughed grimly. Impossible was a word they didn't have time to entertain. Each repair, each bolt, each jury-rigged solution brought the carrier closer to life. The impossible was becoming reality, piece by piece. And then, late that evening, a faint vibration ran through the hull. Yorktown had begun to flex against the dock. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Life was returning to her steel skeleton. Engineers and sailors froze, exchanging looks of disbelief. Could she really float? Could she really sail again, after everything? Far above, in the offices of Japanese intelligence, Yamamoto's face darkened as more intercepted chatter confirmed the impossible. Yorktown was moving under her own power. The war had just shifted in ways no one had dared imagine. June 6, 1942. Dawn broke over the horizon, spilling gold across the restless Pacific waves. The USS Yorktown, battered, patched, and barely whole, cut through the water like a survivor refusing to die. Every sailor on deck could feel it. The ship itself seemed alive, groaning softly as her engines hummed back to life. The salty wind carried a mix of exhaustion, adrenaline, and determination. You could taste the salt on your lips, hear the slap of waves against the hull, the creak of steel that had endured bombs, torpedoes, fire, and near certain doom. Below deck, Chief Petty Officer Robert Hughes moved among the crew, checking pumps, engines, and fuel lines. The ship still bore scars from Midway, twisted metal, charred wood, scorched paint, but she floated. Every bolt they had hammered, every patch they had welded, every pump they had restarted in the last 72 hours had mattered. Against all odds, Yorktown was alive. She had risen from near destruction as if challenging the Pacific itself. Lieutenant Commander James Clark walked the flight deck, watching the crew ready the planes. Fighters and bombers were lined up with precise care, ready to strike Japanese carriers whose names were whispered among naval intelligence: Akagi, Kaga, Saryu. Every aviator knew the stakes. The Americans were outnumbered, but Yorktown's survival gave them a fighting chance. Every step Clark took across the battered deck felt weighted with history. The carrier wasn't just a ship anymore. She was a statement, a declaration that resilience, courage, and ingenuity could defy fate itself. The men who had repaired her, the engineers, welders, and sailors, watched from the rails as the first squadrons launched. You could almost hear their hearts beat with each propeller spin, each engine roar. Every plane that lifted from Yorktown's deck carried not just bombs and bullets, but the spirit of a crew that had turned impossibility into reality. And far across the Pacific, Japanese pilots, who had expected to face nothing but survivors or sunken wreckage, now saw the unthinkable, a repaired American carrier returning to the battlefield. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stared at the reports with disbelief. His intelligence had been clear: Yorktown was finished. Yet intercepted communications confirmed movement, flight operations, and engagement-ready crews. His brow furrowed, jaw tight. Could one single carrier, barely repaired, really affect the outcome of the upcoming battle? Every seasoned officer in his room felt the same unease, a deep, gnawing doubt. Plans that had relied on American weakness now faced an unexpected variable, and variables in war could be deadly. Meanwhile, over the ocean, Yorktown's planes streaked toward the Japanese fleet. Dive bombers veered from cloud cover, fighters skimming the water, propellers slicing through mist. Japanese lookouts spotted them and raised alarms. "What? They've repaired her," a voice cracked through the intercom. Confusion rippled through the enemy command. Carriers like Yorktown were supposed to be incapacitated for months, out of reach, out of action. And yet, here she was, defiant and deadly. On board, the crew prepared for engagement. Bomb racks were checked, fuel lines secured, and pilots ran final pre-flight inspections. Each man knew this was the culmination of 72 hours of work under impossible pressure. Lives had been gambled, sweat and blood had soaked into every surface, and every man had prayed that the repairs would hold. And now, with the enemy fleet looming ahead, it was time to prove that every effort, every ounce of energy, had not been wasted. The battle began with the first torpedo planes striking the Japanese carriers. Yorktown's pilots dove, climbed, and banked with lethal precision. Bombs dropped, explosions rippled through decks, smoke and fire coiling into the sky. You could almost feel the tension on Yorktown's decks, an electric charge of fear and exhilaration mixed in equal measure. Sailors watched through binoculars and periscopes as the enemy carriers reeled under the sudden assault. Moments that could decide the Pacific War were unfolding in real time, and every heartbeat felt like eternity. As the sun climbed higher, Japanese forces scrambled to respond. Their Zeros darted through the sky, attempting to intercept American fighters. But the pilots from Yorktown, many who had barely slept in the past 3 days, moved with uncanny synchronicity. Training, adrenaline, and sheer will guided their hands. Dive bombers hit their targets, strafing runs shredded decks, and torpedoes tore through hulls. The enemy's sense of invincibility shattered in minutes. They had mocked American carriers, assumed one downed ship meant victory, and now the tide had turned. Below deck, Chief Hughes and the engineering teams braced for counterattacks. Every jolt of the ship, every explosion echoing through the hull reminded them of how close they had come to failure. "Hold her together," Hughes whispered under his breath, tightening a valve. "She's ours to save, and ours to fight." The pumps strained, engines roared, and Yorktown held steady, a steel leviathan refusing to sink even under the heaviest blows. Across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence frantically recalculated strategies. Admiral Yamamoto's plans, once clear and confident, now teetered under uncertainty. One repaired carrier, one small fleet of planes, had shifted the balance. It was a lesson no enemy ever wanted to learn: underestimate human resolve, and even the mightiest forces can crumble. Hours passed. Smoke, fire, and the roar of engines dominated the horizon. Yorktown's planes returned to deck, some damaged, some limping, but every landing was a victory. Sailors rushed to refuel and rearm, welding and patching minor deck damage even as the battle raged on. You could see the exhaustion in every movement, yet every man pressed on. Fatigue had no authority here. Only survival, duty, and courage mattered. By dusk, the Japanese fleet was reeling. Ships burned, planes crashed, and chaos rippled through once confident command posts. Yorktown had survived, Yorktown had fought, and Yorktown had changed the outcome of Midway. Her repaired hull, patched in 72 hours against impossible odds, had not just floated, it had struck a decisive blow that would echo through history. And on the deck, Clark, Hughes, and the weary crew stood in silence, watching smoke drift from distant targets. Every scar on the ship, every bloodied hand, every sleepless hour had culminated in this moment. The Pacific had been won, not by machinery alone, but by men who refused to surrender to despair, by human ingenuity and determination that turned the impossible into triumph. As night fell, Yorktown's silhouette glided across the calm ocean, battered but victorious. Stars reflected on the water, as if the universe itself acknowledged the miracle that had unfolded. And somewhere in Tokyo, Yamamoto stared at the reports, jaw tight, mind racing. One ship, repaired against all odds, had upended plans, changed strategies, and defied fate. The war had turned, and history had been written by a crew who dared to believe. Type subscribe to follow the journey of courage, innovation, and the unsung heroes of World War II. The USS Yorktown would sail on, a testament to human spirit, proving that even in the darkest hours, resilience can rewrite destiny.